Om Parthaya Pradibodhidam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Grathidam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaidam Radavarshinim Bhagavadim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manusundadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudramarudastunnandi Divaistavaihi Vede Sangapadakramopanishader Gayantiyam Samagaha Dhyanavastita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyantiyam Yogino Yasyandam Navidusura Suraganah Devaya Tasmai Namah. So, we were discussing the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. We were discussing the 7th, 8th and 9th, and then of course the 10th verse we will discuss today. In fact, in this 13th chapter, these 4 verses form a distinct group because they explain a very wonderful, unique aspect of Vedanta philosophy, which in short I can say, it says that the highest devotion and the highest spiritual knowledge are the same. The highest knowledge in the Vedantic tradition is called the Jnanam or Advaita Jnanam, or knowledge of the infinite oneness of existence. That means the idea that the same reality, the same spiritual truth resides in all human beings, and that is omnipresent, that is present everywhere. The immanence and the omnipresence. And of course the transcendence. All these aspects are included in the Advaita philosophy. Now you may say this kind of an idealism, it is a kind of spiritual idealism. Now Bhagavad Gita is going to tell you the 10th chapter. The highest spiritual idealism and a devoted prayer in a temple or a church are practically the same at the highest level. And that is the interpretation of Shankaracharya, the exponent, the original exponent of Advaita philosophy, to discuss. So the verse is the 10th verse of the 13th chapter. Those of you can take the text. Maicha ananya yogena bhaktihi avibhicharini vivikta desha sevitum anabhir jana samsati. It's a famous. What it means is devotion, total dedication to me here means you can, in whatever tradition you pray to your highest ideal of God. If you are completely dedicated and devoted to that highest idea of God, devotion we call it. You may call it the equivalent maybe in Christian tradition, maybe mysticism of Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint John of the Cross. You find many mystics who actually went beyond the conventional definitions of religion and the man-made barriers of religion, but reached the highest spiritual experience, direct experience, which is called mysticism in the Western context. In India's spiritual tradition, it is called Prabhati or Sharanagati, means total surrender. That and also the realization of the oneness of existence are the same. So if you realize that the whole existence is spiritually one, that is the same as realizing the presence of the divine in you or everywhere, the same. So that is the essence of this verse. So here, ananya yogena bhaktihi means if you are devoted to your ideal without any diversion, without any distraction, without any dissipation, this one-pointed, single-minded dedication to your spiritual ideal is called ananya yoga, means not linked to anything else, single-minded devotion. It doesn't mean fanaticism. Actually, whatever may be our religious tradition, whatever may be our religious faith, if we actually go beyond the rituals and external practices and philosophical debates and deep dogmas and reach the experience level, then we cannot be fanatic. We cannot say, my God and my little religion, that's the only reality, everything else is false. You can't say that. Because the moment you experience a spark of divinity within you, by realizing the spiritual oneness of existence, then you have a natural instinctive identification with the whole existence. You can't be a bad neighbor, you can't be hostile to anyone, you can't do, deliberately you can't do anything wrong, you can't hurt anyone, because you will understand by hurting another person, you're hurting yourself. So that is an interesting thing. So you can see here, devotion doesn't lead to fanaticism, rather devotion leads to universal spirituality. A lover of God cannot hate anyone or anything. Even those who do not belong to his own denomination or his own religion, who may be worshipping God from a different perspective, giving God a different name, born in a different religious tradition, still you can't hate him. In fact, you don't feel any need to correct anyone. If a person is sincere, honest and pure, God reveals himself to that person. So that devotion is called Ananya Yoga, and it's called Bhakti Ravibhijarini. Actually, it means unwavering. That's a real meaning. A devotion which doesn't change, which doesn't waver, which doesn't undergo modification, which doesn't get disturbed. So this is an important thing. It's a kind of universal spiritual ideal. So true devotion to God, when it goes beyond external practices, when it actually becomes spirituality, then it becomes a kind of sublime humanism, spiritual humanism, not humanism as understood in Western philosophical or political ideologies, but humanism in a profoundly spiritual sense. It becomes universal spirituality. And Shankaracharya says that is also the highest reach of non-dualism. Remember, non-dualism is a philosophy which tells you that you can be spiritual even without going to a temple or a church. If you can realize the universal oneness of existence, that makes you a better human being, that makes you a humanist, that makes you compassionate, kind-hearted, good towards everyone. And that is the essence of spirituality. And religion helps in a very profound way when religion leads to spirituality. And spirituality is nothing but this universal, this realization of this universal spiritual oneness. In fact, that's why we were discussing all, you can find the earlier verses, all these, Amanittam, Adambhittam, Ahimsa, Kshantirajyavam, all the previous verses will tell you. And also, in fact, the previous chapter, the 12th chapter, tells that if you become a good human being, that is the whole essence of becoming a devotee of God. So a devotee of God is fundamentally a good, compassionate human being. I mean, becoming humane in the true sense of the term. So, in fact, Shankaracharya is a very profound and one of the celebrated verses from Shankaracharya's commentary on the Gita. And I think I mentioned to you earlier, Bhagavad Gita is a condensation of all the basic, fundamental, spiritual and philosophical teachings in Hindu tradition, or Vedanta as we call it. It is a small little book, 700 verses. But it's a condensation, it's a very small part of a much bigger and larger work, that is Mahabharata, which has got more than 100,000 verses, several times as big as Homer's Iliad, Odyssey, and Virgil's Aeneid all put together. Such a huge work. Its largest version has more than 145,000 verses. A smaller version, 100,000 verses. Parts are being translated. Mahabharata was translated in fragments right from 18th century into German, into French, and later into English. Right from 18th century, this translation began. Parts of Mahabharata. And Bhagavad Gita is a small fragment of the huge book. And that book contains the whole essence of Vedanta teachings. Now, this book remained almost obscure, unknown, till 8th century AD. And in 8th century, a great man arose in India. His name was Shankaracharya, who is the greatest philosopher saint in Indian tradition. He wrote almost 126 books and 65 very profound Sanskrit poetry. In fact, the greatest poet of Sanskrit language also Shankaracharya, the greatest philosopher also, and the greatest system builder. He founded 10 monastic orders, of which our monastic order is just one of the 10. So if you go to India, if you go to any monastic order, Chinmaya Mission or any order, they all belong to one or other of the 10 monastic orders founded by Shankaracharya. And he is considered to be the greatest philosopher India ever produced. He was the one who actually brought Gita to the attention of the world by writing the first commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. And according to Swami Vivekananda, who is the founder of this Vedanta Society, one of the most important works of Shankaracharya, we did many things. One of the most important work of Shankaracharya was writing this commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. Because if you had not written a commentary on this book, today we won't be discussing Gita, and perhaps it's one of the most translated books in this world. And he says in his first commentary, says, Mayi Ishware, Mayi cha Ishware Annayogena Apradak Samadhina na Anyo Bhagavado Vasudeva Para Asti Adasa Eva No Giti Idi Evam Nischida Avibijarani Buddhi Ananya Yoga Tena Bhajanam Bhakti Na Vibhijarana Shila Vibijarani Bhakti Sachaknyanam. So the last statement is, that is knowledge, that is also the highest knowledge. He gives a long description of unwavering devotion, single-minded devotion. Let us say single-minded devotion that you, in Western context, that you find in great mystics like Eckhart or Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint John of the Cross, and also some of the great Russian mystics of 19th century, in the way of a pilgrim, the humble peasant portrayed in the way of a pilgrim, Now, you can find this single-minded devotion. And Shankaracharya says, this single-minded devotion is also the highest knowledge. So very often when we talk about knowledge, we talk about study of philosophy. In Christian context, we study about Augustine, Aquinas, their works and so on. In Indian context, studying the huge volumes of Buddhism or Hinduism, the huge Sanskrit volumes, so you call him a philosopher, you call him a saint. But Shankaracharya says that doesn't make a person a philosopher. A person becomes a true philosopher when his mind is sublime, is elevated, when he realizes that the God whom he worships in his temple exists in the hearts of everyone in this world. So he feels a spiritual affinity with the whole creation. Okay, so that is the essence of his commentary. Now, this is the 10th verse. But we should understand a clear picture of this when we keep in mind the earlier verses. See, for example, the 7th verse. Amanittum adambittum ahimsa kshanti rajyavam acharyopasanam shaujam sthiryam atma vinigraha. Now, one should be unpretentious. The real definition of amanita means a person who respects everyone, who does not demand respect from others. A person who respects everyone but doesn't insist on getting respect from others. The very high, in fact, these are the qualities that makes a person a highest devotee and a highest Advaitin or non-dualist or a philosopher in Vedantic context. Then, so again, adambhitum. Also, you won't have you won't make any effort to parade your greatness. You won't be egoistic. Total freedom from a kind of negative ego. Ego, it doesn't mean that we should not have self-confidence, but it means we must have the faith that we can achieve anything that's good. That's actually an expression of our spiritual divinity within. But we should not say others cannot do that. So that's important thing. So adambhita means, well, I can means I will be able to accomplish many things. Others too also will be able to accomplish many things. So the single personal ego, its total absence, is another quality. And again, ahimsa. I mean, we should not do harm to anyone. We should not hurt anyone in this world, either by action, by thought, or by deed, or by anything. We should totally practice. Ahimsa means non-violence. In fact, it was this verse that actually influenced Mahatma Gandhi. So Gandhi used there are a few verses that Gandhi used to read every day according to his own admission. Which he wrote a commentary on this book. Of course, the name of the book is Anasakti Yoga, the science of non-attachment. That's the meaning of it. But it means we should do our work without any personal selfish motive. But the ahimsa ideal that he got from 2-3 chapters, 16th chapter, and also the 13th chapter, means total freedom from any thought of doing harm to another person, injuring somebody, not just physically, mentally, by word, by thought. We should not. Even when we have a violent thought, that also can poison our mind and eventually poison our thoughts and emotions. So not just in word or action, but even in thought, we should practice total non-violence. So all these will take you to the zenith of devotion. And again, Kshanti Arjavam. So again, one should have the determination to remain unaffected even while confronting problems. That's every spiritual seeker, if he becomes a serious spiritual seeker, you find suddenly a lot of problems, lot of challenges will come from, mostly from our own mind. This mind also declares a war upon you the moment you try to practice spirituality for a beginner. But when we go further, you find our mind slowly cooperates. At the beginning, mind may appear to be a bit hostile. But slowly, as we persist, as we practice all these spiritual qualities, our mind eventually becomes our own best friend and guide. So, and then straightforwardness, in word, thought and deed, we should be the same. We should not create artificial layers around our own mind. You know, when we become too diplomatic, when we go out of the way just to please others by external gestures or by sweet words, just by pretension, we are actually hurting our own mind. Then this mind will bite back at some point. It's an important thing. So the best disease, the best remedy for many of the problems of mind, anxiety and worries is to be straightforward. Because we may be able to please many people, or we may be able to deceive others, but we cannot deceive our own mind. And if we try to deceive our own mind by creating artificial layers, then at some point mind hits back. And how does our mind hit back? Through anxieties, worries, bipolar problems. Without any worry, mind worries about many things. Without any reason, mind becomes anxious about many things, because we have fed our mind with bad food. It's just like dog. If you feed your dog, try to feed your dog with stones, it suddenly barks and bites. Good food means it wags its tail. Mind also reacts and responds according to the food it gets. And then, of course, these are the qualities that we need at the very beginning of our spiritual life. And slowly, we should learn from a teacher. Here, one important point is made here, There are two kinds of learning spiritual literature. One way of learning, we make our own effort, we take books from libraries, social media or internet, that's one thing, that's good. But that's not always enough. For every spiritual tradition, there is a royal lineage that goes back to prehistorical times. We need not blindly follow a beaten track and without using our own reasoning power, but we should try to learn the traditional interpretation. Then only we should use our own reasoning power to form our own views. So acharyopasanam, shaujam, stairyam, atma vinigraha, all these qualities are given. You should approach a teacher who has studied from his teacher, and again who has studied from his teacher. The lineage should be respected. It's an important thing remembered here. Lineage is respected not to become blind followers of a hierarchy, but rather to use our independent reasoning power with a sense of propriety, so that we won't go wild in interpreting ancient spiritual teachings using modern methods. So that's an interesting thing. And then, of course, there are a few important ideas present in the next two verses, which is a very profound one. Indriyartheshu vairagyam anahangaraya vacha. The first line. I mean, a kind of sense of renunciation, a sense of detachment towards worldly enjoyments, to objects of worldly enjoyment. It doesn't mean that we should run away from the world or all of us should become ascetic. Not at all. When we make use of the gifts of nature, maybe the fruits of modern science and technology, for our own comforts, our own success, we should also be able to say no to certain things. So the ability to deny oneself certain things is important while making use of the fruits of the comforts of science and technology, and also the gifts of nature. Otherwise, what happens, whatever we enjoy can be the cause of tomorrow's agony and problems. So, a sense of propriety and balance while making use of what the nature gives us. And how do we do that? By developing the ability to say no to certain things. I mean, when mind goes after certain things, mind becomes to be filled with desire for worldly things. We should tell our own mind no. In fact, that's very important. And maybe that is the most important thing needed for our times, 21st century. The ability to say no to certain things. It doesn't mean Gita is teaching a life-negating, a world-negating philosophy. Not at all. It just gives us a mild warning. For nature, earth, water, air, all these are wonderful gifts of nature. Now that's why, according to one Vedic sage, we are all guests on this earth. One Prithvi Suktam is a famous hymn in Yajurveda. We find other Vedas also, Rig Veda. It says, we are all guests on this earth. And earth is our dear mother. So Prithvi is called Mata. These words sometimes are used as synonyms, means mother. So if we can practice this Indriyartheshu vairagyam, a sense of renunciation, a sense of detachment towards worldly things, to use the gift, the objects of nature, the gifts of nature with a sense of balance and propriety and level-headedness. And vairagyam anahangaraya vacha. So all is included. That means freedom from egotism. And then in the next line, in the 8th verse, there's a famous statement, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Dukkha Dosha Anudarshanam. We already just mildly discussed this earlier. So 5 types of evils in this world. Understanding or recognizing 5 problems that frequently confront our life. That's the real meaning. What are these? First, in Vedantic tradition, this birth is great, wonderful only if we use our life for a higher purpose. So, on the other hand, this is true in Buddhist tradition also, Praditya Samudpada, 12-link chain. We are born, we live for a long time, we enjoy and we suffer, because both enjoyments and sufferings, happiness and unhappiness, they come one after another in continuous succession. And then body becomes weak when we get too old, sick, and then we disappear from this world. And according to Vedanta, Hinduism, Buddhism, all these traditions of religions born of Indian subcontinent, they believe in reincarnation, rebirth. So, birth, life, death, rebirth. This is a chain. Now, one should be able to look beyond this. Again, if you read Buddha's own interpretation, it is called the Praditya Samutpada, dependent origination. This is an English word, which actually means everything in this world has a cause. It's a causal link. And he says, the mother of all problems, the original problem is of desire for worldly enjoyments. And it is the desire for worldly enjoyments that leads to birth, sufferings, and enjoyment. Happiness and unhappiness come one after another, interchangeably in our life. And then we get old and die and rebirth. In fact, it was this vision of these 3 dark side of human life that made Buddha leave his home, and he became a great philosopher. An old man, a sick man, and a dead man being taken to the cremation ground. These 3 visions of the dark realities of life. These are things that we wish that it exist, but we cannot wish them away. They are unavoidable. Doesn't mean that we should always be pondering over those things, we should become pessimistic or we should become depressed, not at all. What it means, of course, if a person is depressed, don't tell him. But if a person is overjubilant, too confident, always running after things, tell him these 3 problems are there. So it depends upon the person, But the realization of these 3 realities can give us one important benefit. That is, it makes us a more mature view of life as a whole, and it can give us a kind of spiritual level-headedness, a balanced outlook. Again, it is not a negative outlook. Frequently, this is wrongly and misinterpreted as some kind of a negative, world-negating, life-negating attitude, not at all, or pessimistic attitude, not at all. What it says is, along with all the great things you may acquire in this world, a big job, a lot of money, wealth, everything, at the same time, keep this in our pocket at least. This fact, that is, all these things are not everlasting. One day they will disappear. It doesn't mean that we should cry and weep, not at all. When we get out of the way in our pursuit of worldly enjoyments, too much of obsession for this desire for selfish enjoyment, worldly enjoyment, and that sometimes leads to sickness, even premature death. At that time we can remind ourselves, all money, wealth, all these are necessary, health, everything is necessary. Still, these things are not eternal. So, that realization, how to acquire that mature perspective, that is the description you find in this verse, in the 8th verse, 2nd line. It talks about 5 types of problems. The translations you may find 5 evils. It should not be misled, because very often we know this dosha. Dosha is a Sanskrit word. 3 dosha you find in Ayurveda. Vata, Pitta, Kapha, that you find. These are 3 problems of our physical body, which they should be in balance. When there's an imbalance, it leads to disease and so on. All the medicines are meant to rectify the imbalance. But here, the same word is used, doshas. 5 types of, let us say, we call it imbalance, problems, disturbances. But very often the translator may use the word evil. Is not wrong, is correct. But the point is, the implication is different from what the English word could mean in dictionary. So, one is janma dosha, understanding, realization. This life itself is basically a problem. That again, I can remind you of Buddha, because many of you are familiar with Buddha's 4 noble truths, Chatvari Arya Satyani, and 8-fold disciplines. That's a realization of these 4 noble truths. There is dukkha, this problem, and there is a cause for this problem, there is a way out, and the way out is these 8-fold disciplines that can lead you to nirvana, spiritual emancipation. This is Buddha's, the essence of Buddha's teachings. And when he describes these 8-fold disciplines, he's talking about righteousness, the right conduct, the right discipline, the right meditation, samyik ajiva, samyik smriti, samyik vyayama, the right conduct, right word, samyik walk, right effort, right livelihood, right concentration. So he used the word right. It means appropriate, proper, balanced. Not being too much attached to this world, because this world by itself is not a perfect, complete entity. It has certain problems. When you realize that it has some problems, you can enjoy this world. Actually, if we can get a mature perspective on our own life and this world, we can really enjoy this world. A problem in this world will not become a disaster, will not appear to be a disaster. We won't be shocked if there is a problem, because the world by itself is incomplete. So that is the idea behind this one. Second one is mrityu dosha, means death also is a dosha, is a problem. Why? Now the point is, when a person thinks that this health, this youth, this beauty, this wealth, all these are eternal, going to be everlasting, and then what happens when he suddenly gets old, sick, then death appears to be a scary, an intimidating thing. So that problem is called mrityu dosha, janma mrityu dosha, jara vyadhi. That's a very interesting thing. There are long descriptions in commentaries. Okay, now suppose we are well educated, well placed, a good job, and then maybe when we are 70 years, 80 years, maybe 90 years, we retire from the job, and still clinging to the worldly things, still cannot let go our obsession for worldly things. That is called jara dosha. When the hair has gone grey, face has wrinkled, body has become weak, mind also is unstable, still mind is filled with the most terrible, the most most undesirable kinds of worldly pleasures. Mind going after worldly pleasures all the time. That is a disaster from a spiritual perspective. At the same time, if the person thinks, well, Jara is natural thing, it only tells us the fundamental truth that this body is not eternal. So once we realize this body is not eternal, all the enjoyments are not eternal, we need not run away from enjoyments, but we can look at this world from a mature perspective. In fact, that helps us to enjoy this world and enjoy our own life in a much more effective manner. If a problem arises, we won't be shocked. That's a very good state of mind. When we can reach a point when a problem, when the share markets collapse or stock markets collapse, stock markets are bound to collapse. When we get 90-year-old, 80-year-old, there is a health problem, doctor diagnosed something, suddenly getting shocked, his body is bound to get some problems. That's a game, that's a very inescapable destiny of the human body. So also everything. Once we realize this, then one need not be unhappy at any point of time. Not realizing this is called Jara dosha. So you can find Lord Krishna is talking about 5 kinds of doshas. In fact, Buddha spoke about these 4 noble truths. Here 5. It's a much more practical level. Another one is Vyadhi dosha. That's again old age, sickness, and again worrying about the sickness. So every mention of this dosha problem also includes a way out of it. Just realize that old age, sickness, all these things are inescapable part of our life. Intellectual understanding may not always help. Everyone knows this is a fact. You need not be a medical professional to understand the body is bound to fall sick. You need not be a medical professional. You need not go to medical college to understand the body is bound to fall sick. But the point is, what we know to be a fact, without any doubt, it doesn't translate into our emotional intelligence, it doesn't translate into our common sense. So when a problem arises, we get shocked because the intellectual understanding of the basic nature of the world and our own body doesn't come to a rescue because it's just an intellectual understanding. So Gita tells us that this should become a part of our emotional understanding. And when we take to devotion, when we take to spiritual life, the first thing that we realize is this world and this body, all these things are not eternal, but this is not an intellectual conviction. It is not something that we learn from a medical book. Rather, it is something that we know to be a fact, and this realization of this fact should become a part of our emotional structure. Then it is easy to live in this world. And then the third one is, the fifth one is called dukkha dosha. Dukkha means 3 types of dukkhas. Mean anything that affects our body, or problems coming from physical illnesses or other external factors, all these are problems. So once we realize that this is part of human life, then these problems will not have a devastating impact on our life. They will not come as a shock. We'll be able to absorb it very easily. We'll be able to take them in our stride. So that is the essence of the 8th verse. And then Lord Krishna talks about the need for equilibrium of mind, keeping the mind in a state of equilibrium. We should be able to look beyond happiness and unhappiness equation. If we become overjoyed when something pleasant happens, then one day we are bound to become unhappy when its opposite happens. So, when something that gives us pleasure happens, we should not become overjoyed. And also when something that gives us unhappiness happens, we should not become too much upset. So our mind should be kept a little above this happiness-unhappiness equation. We should be able to look upon happiness and unhappiness as the same, with the same even-mindedness. They are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have a coin with only one side. These are two integral parts of human life. Once we realize this, then we will be able to live in this world a spiritual life. So spiritual life doesn't mean meditating all the time. Spiritual life actually means making use of these great truths of life which we know to be real, but making use of them in our everyday life experiences. When it becomes part of our emotional structure, when it becomes kind of spiritual common sense. That's why Lord Krishna says that in the 10th verse, the highest devotion, we discuss elaborately, the highest devotion and the highest philosophy are the same. That's Shankaracharya's commentary says. After this, in the 11th verse, Lord Krishna takes another subject. Before that, there are a few things which may be interesting for us. One is, how do we practice this devotion? In Hindu tradition, there are different methods, this practice of devotion. We can approach God from different angles. It is called 9 forms of devotion. It's called Navadha Bhakti, we call it. So, it comes in the Bhagavata Purana. The Sanskrit original verse is Sravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, smaranam, sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakhyam, Atma Nivedanam. Means 9 types of devotion. Those of you who are familiar with Saint Teresa of Avila's inner castle, if I'm going deeper and deeper into the inner chambers of our mind, that's what it is dealing with. So, first, we must try to train our ears to listen to auspicious things. Sravanam means. Because what our ears brings to our mind can create problems for the mind. So, we hear many things. To begin with, along with so many unnecessary things, let us also make use of our ears to listen to something that's good and auspicious. So, try to feed the mind with good thoughts. In fact, mind also needs good food, just like the body. Body falls sick if we eat bad food. So mind also falls sick if we feed your mind with bad food. And the mind falls sick and mental illness manifests itself as anxieties, worries, problems, and so on. Many, there are different, different kinds of schizophrenic problems, delusions of persecution, grandeur, so many bipolar. All these are different manifestations of mental illness. We are not discussing psychiatry here, but what we are talking about is the importance of feeding your mind with good food. That's everyone understands, because feeding the body with bad food, we know it's the result. The same is true with regard to mind. So how to feed our mind with good food? And how does mind collect food? Mind makes use of 5 senses of perception. The ears, by hearing. We feed our mind with bad food by listening to terrible things, unpleasant things. Then sight. Eyes and mind together. They focus on a visual object. And we see, and that impression is stored in the mental system, and that becomes bad food for the mind. So, mind and ears together brings bad food by listening to bad things. Mind and eyes together bring bad food through the visual objects. And mind and smell, the sense of smell, and the sense of touch, and the sense of taste. Sense of taste everyone understands, at least. So all these five senses of perception and mind together, they function. And when mind is dragged into these external objects of enjoyments by these by these channels of external connection, eyes, ears, sense of touch, sense of smell, and sense of taste, we are actually feeding our mind with bad food if we don't use some discretion as to what we are listening to, what we are seeing, what we are connecting ourselves with. So that is one thing, Sravanam. So that is a thing. So Sravanam is used here, means listening, but through a mechanism of Vedantic hermeneutics, Archanam. By implication, Sravanam or hearing includes not only hearing but also by eyes, connecting with our eyes, ears, skin, the sense of touch, sense of smell, and sense of taste. So, and next one is, we remember these things. So, smaranam means remembering. The first discipline in feeding our mind with good food is, let us, along with some undesirable things, we have no control over everything, we can also listen to something that is auspicious, something that is spiritual, something that is sublime, elevating. That's all important thing. This is the first step. So, the second, and this will influence our mind in remembering. So, smaranam. So, and this continues. We will discuss the other 7 disciplines in our next session. Now you are most welcome with questions. Most welcome. Thank you.
Swamiji, thank you for the lecture, first of all. With feeding the mind good food, I understand that, we want to try to, hear sublime, elevating things. What about in modern life when we are exposed to, the ugliness that we see on the streets and, on with the media and stuff like that? I mean, I guess some people would say use mindfulness. I'm just curious if you have any recommendations for dealing with, the ugly side of things too, that we have to deal with in modern society.
Yeah. That's true, So mindfulness is a mechanism of focusing your mind on something in a detached manner, but also keeping in mind the fundamental impermanence of everything that you experience. Once you can do that, then it won't affect our mind. That's true. So, mindfulness is based on Buddha's famous discourse, that is Sativattana Sutta in Khuddaka Nikaya in the Pali literature. So here, what we are discussing, we are approaching from another angle. So, along with so many things that we hear, we listen to, we should also try to listen to something that is auspicious. And once we know these are things which are auspicious, which may benefit us spiritually, then that we may remember. After all, we really cannot keep our eyes or ears closed. But once we keep in our mind that unpleasant memories or impressions created by unpleasant sounds have a negative effect on the mind, then we will be able to focus on the most auspicious. For example, we are listening to many terrible things, but there are wonderful hymns, songs, great musical things, wonderful things also. Even the internet itself is going to be wonderful things, and things which are not so very wonderful, of course, as you know. So we can focus on those pleasant. That's a medicine for the mind. That's a tonic that keeps the mind. So Sravanam, in the more traditional sense, listening to Omkara. But for that you should know the spiritual significance of that word or symbol. But in the broader sense, it can mean listening to anything that is auspicious, that contains a spiritual content, that takes us away from the world of sensual things, enjoyments, but takes it to a higher level. So every religious tradition, and even in non-religious traditions, there are great things which are really good. That's what I say. That'd be good for the mind. Yeah, right.
So with the doshas that you mentioned,
Yeah.
the imbalances, the disturbances,
Yeah.
you mentioned that we need to have this become part of our emotional or intelligence or spiritual common sense, that not just an intellectual understanding, but I guess more pragmatic, how to go about making that more
Yeah.
of part of our actual emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
and not just an intellectual,
Yeah.
understanding.
At the end of that verse, you find dukkha dosha anudarshanam. Darshana means connecting with that, seeing that, continuously remembering that. That's the real meaning. So we must, certain things we know to be facts, we know, everyone knows, but we don't remember. So if we can just elevate our mind to some higher level, it's possible. I was giving the example last time, For example, when you are reading a very good book, some spiritual or mystical, even not necessarily mystical, but let's say, I give the example last time, you remember Walden, Thoreau's Walden. He's talking about these pantheistic ideas going around, great ideas, Suppose you're reading that, and if somebody comes and disturbs you, you may, this is all right, we won't bother, because you are interested, your mind is linked to that great book or anything more sublime, or any great poem. If you are reading the Bhagavad Gita or the Sermon on the Mount, still better. Anything that takes our mind away from the world of senses to some higher level of thinking, intellectual maturity. At that time, if somebody comes and disturbs you, you may just dismiss that. Oh, it's not so very important. You may be focused on this. I can give another example. You are reading a thriller, some adventurous, some violent scenes, and you are reading it. In the same person, you may react differently. So you can imagine what reading, which actually it combines the effect of both seeing and hearing. Because when you read something, you are hearing mentally, you are hearing, and also visually you are seeing. That's what happens when you read a book. The visual image takes place, it forms in your mental system, and of course when you read, you listen. That's why you are able to remember that word again. So the point is, at that time, when you are reading something wonderful, something of a more spiritual nature, your mind is able to react to an external stimuli in a more mature, level-headed manner. Just to give an example, it's a fact. So, you can imagine how our five senses of perception and mind can be used in a very creative, constructive manner to feed our mind with good food, so that mind develops a kind of filtering mechanism. It filters out all negative, unpleasant things slowly. So that helps us to store, to accumulate a good store of good impressions in our mind. That will certainly become a source of maturity and level-headedness. It's called the spiritual common sense, it becomes. In its most sublime level, it becomes the highest devotion and the highest spiritual philosophy. That's what Shankaracharya says. Which I read the commentary, the Bhashya. Okay. So thank you for the question.
Maharaj, one question, Maharaj.
Okay, please, most welcome.
One last question.
Yeah.
Can you provide clarification on, you said once you attain spirituality, you will not go after these desires or growth. You mentioned in another lecture about the butcher who, after realizing the spirituality in Bhagavata, he continues to be the butcher, right? So my question here is that when we are in this world, we are listening to all these lectures, we are not attached, we are getting better at not being attached to success or failure, but still I think we can look at our job as a spiritual way to attain higher power, to do more good. So can you clarify some confusion there?
Yeah. It's any connection, if we can intellectually connect with some spiritual idea, that in a very positive manner, it influences our mind and our outlook, including our outlook towards our life and work, job, whatever it is. So in such a situation, it is not the work as such that matters. Our mind, our attitude towards the work we do, that really matters. So in the story you mentioned Vyaadha Gita, butcher. The butcher was son of a butcher. He went, when he was small, he did a lot of studies and austerities, but that was the only job he knew. And he became a great philosopher, but he did this job, but he could do that with a sense of detachment. Without an idea of selfish motive. So mind develops a kind of detachment. Remember, detachment can have a negative connotation in modern times. That's not what we are talking about. Detachment here means the ability to prevent our mind from becoming a slave to some obsessive desire or infatuation. That's what it means. Detachment here means the ability to do your job as a master and not as a slave. We can do our work as a master, we can do. But when we become infatuated, when we become obsessed with a selfish desire, then while doing the work, we are worried about the results. If the results are not of the expectations, then we are also worried. If the results are beyond expectations, we are overjoyed. So that doesn't happen all the time. Next work, next job can be unpleasant. So failure. So at that level, you cannot have a continuous successive, continuation of happy results all the time. At some point, you become unhappy. That's a part of nature. Everyone knows. So the point is, how to remain happy and detached. You have to go beyond happiness and unhappiness equation. And that is what is called detachment. Detachment doesn't mean indifference, negligence, a negative attitude, not at all. Doing the work in the most efficient manner, still remaining detached by making use of this truth that we all know, but not always able to remember, that even the best of results will not be eternal. That's all. So in the Gita, there is a great verse which actually defines the distinction between a person who is doing work with great attachment. He's very efficient and successful, but great attachment, and another person who is working with the same efficiency, the same positive results, but without attachment. Saktaha karmanya vidvam soyadha kurvanti bharata kurya vidvan tatha asaktaha chigishu lokasangraham. The verse tells you that the only difference between a person who is working with detachment and a person who is working with great desire and selfish obsession for the result, the only difference is that the first person is detached. So he has no anxiety. He can sleep peacefully. He has no anxiety, zero worry, zero complaint. He is not a failure. He is equally successful. The other person is successful, but he cannot get 4 hours sleep every day. He is worried about the results. He is anxious. He is complaining, and so on like that. So the only distinction is the wise person is, that's the meaning of the verse. The wise person is equally successful, equally dynamic, equally efficient, effective, but he can enjoy his work because he is detached. So detachment doesn't mean indifference, negligence or anything. It means understanding the fact that we all know to be a fact intellectually, but not able to remember all the time. That all these things will one day change, that's all. That's the idea. Simple fact. As you all know, even kindergarten children know that the world won't remain like this after 1 million years. But we think that the money we have deposited in the bank should remain the same or maybe more all the time. So business should always make profits. It may make loss. But we are not able to stand it because we think it should be always making profits. That's against the very law of the world. Change is an inevitable scientific principle behind this existence, empirical world. Thank you, sir. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.